Howdy, guys. Welcome back to Aiden's Archive. I'm your host, Aiden. And today, we're going to be doing a Generation 1 through 7 Pokemon quiz in only 35 minutes. There is a catch, though, and the catch is I have to do one generation at a time. So I cannot move on to Johto until I finish Kanto. I can't move on to Hoenn until I finish Johto. We have to go in order. Not like Pokemon order. I'm allowed to skip around within the generation. That would be too hard even for me. But this is a bit tough because typically when I do these quizzes, I just sort of hop around to whatever comes to mind. So this is a bit tricky and kind of test my brain in a new and unique way. The total we're looking for, by the way, is 833. That's the first 7 generations, as well as the unknown section, Hisui, and Paldea expeditions. The only 3 sections we're not doing here is Galar, Gigantamax, and Paldea, because I haven't learned the 8th and ninth generation yet. Assume that there will be a third Pokemon quiz video once I figure those out. Anyway, Generation 1, right? I've done this one the most, so I've broken it down by type at this point, and it's fairly simple. The bottom section is your legendary birds, the only dragon, the Dratini line, your fossils, Eevee, and then a couple of one-offs like Snorlax, Lapras, Ditto, Porygon, and then you'll see I've done some of the Safari zones like Tauros, Kangaskhan, Chansey, Tangela, and then the 3 lines from there, Rhyhorn, Rhydon, Execute, Executor, and Dodua, Dodrio. I also got the Ghastly line because that's the only ghost type. 2 more one-offs that I feel like are the hardest in Generation 1, Farfetch'd and Lickitung. And now we're moving on to fighting types. So there's not many. There's Machop, Machoke, Machamp, Mankey, Primeape, as well as Hitmontop and Hitmonchan. Electric types, there's only 3, like real lines. Pikachu, Raichu, Voltorb, Electrode, and then Magnemite and Magneton. Normally, when I do this quiz, I also throw in Magnezone and Pichu. But remember, we can't skip generations. So I'm going to have to remember those evolutions in baby forms when we get to them, which will be a bit of a pain in the ass. But hey, that's fine. I'm getting Zubat, Golbat, Geodude, Graveler, Golem, and Onix just because they're all nearby, which makes a lot of sense to me. And now we're tackling a billion water type Pokemon, easily the most abundant type in Generation 1. If you feel like you're missing somebody, chances are it's because you don't have a water type. But we got Tentacruel, Seal, Dugong, Slowpoke, Slowbro. I typically do them in Psychic, but that works too. Krabby Kingler, Horsey, Seadra, Goldeen, Magikarp, Gyarados, Seaking, Psyduck, Golduck, Starmie. I think I got most of them. Oh, and then the Poliwag line and all of them, right? So a billion water types for sure. Grass is a lot simpler. It's just Oddish, Gloom Vileplume, and then Bellsprout, Weepinbell, Bell, and Victory Bell. Just be sure you remember Tangela or it might get a little tricky. Bugs are fairly easy outside of that first 2 starting lines. So like Caterpie to Butterfree and Weedle to Beedrill. The only main 2 you got to remember is Scyther and Pinsir. And hey, if you're already down there, get the trio, Magnemar, Electabuzz, and Jinx, all of which will have evolutions in baby forms later on. I got some rock guys that I typically get here. Sandshrew, Sandslash, Diglett, Dugtrio, Cubone, Marowak. Otherwise, have a very tough time remembering Marowak. And then poison, because there's a lot of poison types. So Ekans, Arbok, Venonat, Venomoth, Coughing, Wheezing, Grimer, Muck, the Nidoran line. And if you didn't get Tentacruel earlier or Vileplume earlier, now would be a good time to throw them in as well. But I already have. So right now I'm just sort of getting all of them. Birds, there's not many. There's Spearow, Fearow, Pidgey, Pidgeotto, Pidgeot, and then Dodua, Dodrio, and Farfetch'd if you want to throw them in there. I already kind of have them separately. Then we kind of have the pink guys. I don't know why I remember them that way. It's just what it is. Clefairy, Clefable, Jigglypuff, Wigglytuff, all of them. Keep in mind, there is a cat or dog line in every generation. And typically they're very forgettable otherwise. So I like to just keep that in the back of my head. In Generation 1, it is Meowth and Persian. But now we're coming up to our first uh-oh moment. I don't remember the last two. Normally, I would just move on to other generations, but I can't move on until I figure out who these last two are. You're probably screaming at the screen, be like, come on, just type them in already. And believe me, I'm equally frustrated at this point. But we do end up figuring them out. Rest assured. Oh, do we? I don't know. Yeah, it's Psyduck and Golduck. I should have put them with all the water types. Like I said, if you feel like you haven't gotten a line yet, go to water. Water's the go-to. All right, Generation 2, a Pokedex I did not like at first, but I have since come up with a bit of a strategy for it that has made it a lot easier. Doesn't mean it's perfect. It's still harder than Generation 1, but I figured it out enough. So early water types, you get your Lantern, Chinchou, Marill, Azumarill. The based Pokemon, so the ones that I only remember from Generation 2, if you had a gun to my head, Wooper, Quagsire, Houndour, Houndoom, Donphan, Phanpy, and then the Ampharos line. But we'll get to them later. Right now, I'm riding some Gen 1 evolutions: Steelix, Blossom, Politoed, Umbreon, Espeon, Crobat, Slowking? Yep, gotta get them all. You'll find later that I did forget one, and that is going to cost us a minute in time. Let's see if you can guess who it is. Anyway, back to Gen 1 stuff. We got Tyrogue and Hitmontop. Getting my babies, which there's only like 6 or 7, and they're like near each other. So Pichu, Cleffa, and Igglybuff are up top, and then Magby, Smoochum, and Elekid are down low, also kind of next to Tyrogue. There I am getting the Ampharos line. There's not many bugs, so I typically get the ones at the start: Ladybug, Ladian, Spinarak, Ariados, and then get the later ones: Pineco, Fortress, Scizor, and Heracross. I remember, oh yeah, Porygon too. Silly me. Then we get our one Pseudo, Larvitar, Pupitar, Tyranitar. Mischievous is your one ghost type. And then I get a bunch of other one-offs here, like Murkrow, one of the few dark types, Apom, and Yanma. I do Mischievous, Murkrow, Apom, Yanma in that order because those 4 later have evolutions in Generation 4. We got one grass type, Hoppip, Skiploom, and Jumpluff, which reminds me of like Sunkern, Sunflora, Togepi, Togetic, and then for whatever reason, Unknown. I always do Unknown in that order. Don't know why. Now I'm doing the S group: Stantler, Smeargle, Shuckle, Sudowoodo, Skarmory, Slugma, Macargo. A bunch of one-offs that mostly all start with S. Then you got the one-offs that are kind of related to an ice area that I feel like. So like Delibird, Sneasel, Swinub, Piloswine, and then I throw in like Gligar and Octillery and Remoraid just because they're nearby Pokedex-wise. The bottom row is fairly easy. Ho-Oh, Lugia, Celebi. You get Blissey, Miltank, and then it's the dogs. Right now I'm writing down the babies, which is important. There we go. Now we're getting up to there. Keep in mind there are 2 lines that connect Generation 2 and 3 together. One we've already mentioned, Marill, Azumarill, but then there's a Azurill, and then Wobbuffet. So you get Wobbuffet and then Wynot in Generation 3. Now I have the one-offs that are kind of connected to later generations, and not like 4, but like way later. So Corsola has like Corsola in Gen 8, Dunsparce with the Dunsparce, Girafarig with Farigiraf, and Quillfish with Overquill. So I get Wobbuffet down, and I'm like, oh no, I'm missing one. Who could it be? It was that Gen 1 evolution. Who did I forget? It's Kingdra. Kingdra is the answer, and it's going to take a minute for me to figure that out, which is really unfortunate. Normally, when I'm doing this quiz, like the second I write down Onyx, I write down Steelix. The second I do Scyther, I do Scizor, Pinsir, Heracross. Not that that's an evolution, just that I relate the two. Zubat, Golbat, Crobat, Oddish, and Blossom, Poliwag, Politoed, right? However, when you're doing them separately, you got to remember them separately, so you don't get the flow state you normally would. It's Kingdra, by the way. I don't know if I I told you. I've given you enough time. I feel like it's Kingdra. And it's still taking me 8 years to figure out. Oh no. Man, in the moment I was just freaking out because I had done this run like 4 or 5 times and it would always be stumped by like one Pokemon. And it would be a different one every time. Bouffalant in Generation 5 screwed me over one time. Uh Meowth and Persian have before. A lot of Generation 7, but we'll get to them later. Um it's just tough. There's Kingdra. All right. Now moving on to Generation 3, a generation I feel like I am the best at. Not just because I know all the Pokemon, but I kind of at this point know where they are in the Pokedex. It might be worth trying to do the whole thing in order because I probably could, low key. But yeah, you got your starters: Zigzagoon, Linoon, Poochyena, Mightyena, right? And then your bugs, so Wurmple, Cascoon, Silcoon, all of them. Then you got like the Lotad line, the C dot line, Talos, Swellow, Wingull, Pelipper, Shroomish, the Slackoff line. Oh, and then Surskit, and then Masquerain, Ralts, all of them. Anyway, I'm not doing any of them right now because I'm doing the one-offs because there are a good bit of one-offs in Generation 3. Thankfully, they are all fairly memorable, I guess. So Azurill, like I mentioned earlier, why not? Like I mentioned earlier, Nosepass has an evolution in Generation 4. Mawile and Sableye both have megas. So those are pretty easy. And then a lot of those one-offs you can see are kind of down in that bottom row there. Kecleon, Chimecho, Castform, Absol, and then you have the two ghost lines in between them. The dive Pokemon are all fairly close together. So Relicanth, Lovedisc, Clamperl, Huntail, Gorbis, all of them. And then in between the one-offs and the dive Pokemon, you have the Ice Boys: Snorunt, Glalie, Spheal, Celio, Walrein. And then after the dive boys, it's the two pseudo legendaries. So Bagon, Shelgon, Salamence, Metang, Beldum, all of them. And then legendaries. So I feel like the bottom 4 rows are like gimmies every time. The hardest part is just remembering the one-offs all next to each other. But even they kind of show up nearby because that's the cool thing. The Pokedex is related to what area they're from. So if you remember the area of Generation 3, you can usually remember all of the Pokemon in a particular row. There's like 3 water lines that show up in the middle here that I've just grouped together: Feebas, Melodic, Barboach, and Wishcash, and then Corphish and Crawdont. The fossils have their own row to themselves here: Anorith, Almaldo, Laleep, and Cradily. Then you have some of the desert boys. So Baltoy, Claydol, Cacnea, Cacturn, Trapinch, Fabrava, and Flygon. All fairly close enough. You just got to remember Swablu and Altaria, and then, again, some of those goofy one-offs there. Not hard, but they do come in pairs. I said there was a cat and dog in every generation. So in Generation 2, it's Snubble and Gramble. And then in Generation 3, it's Skitty and Delcatty. Both very forgettable lines. Made it a lot easier. Keep in mind, always a cat or a dog. Sometimes both. So I'm getting Wishmer, Loudred, Exploud, our Bug, Nincada, Ninjash, Ninja, all of them. Plusle, there's a billion like electric types because you're going along that bike route to Marvel City. So electric, Manectric, Minoon, Plusle, Volby, Illumi, Sculpin, Swolot, and then Roselia. Keep in mind, Roselia is also here. Typically associate like the Roserade line, right? But nope, technically Generation 3. When I'm doing the full quiz, after I do Skarmory, I tend to do Spinda just because they're in that Ash route. But here I had to remember them separately. But if I type in Spinda, I always get Spoink and Grumpig. So that's good. You got the Aggron line and then the 2 fighting type lines. Believe it or not, these guys gave me a lot of problems, but they're, again, near that same sort of cave. So you just got to remember the area, right? A couple of waters: Carvana, Sharpedo, Whelmer, Wailord, and then like Numel, Camerupt, Torkoal, all your kind of Team Magma, Team Aqua guys. And now I'm just sort of filling out the rest because I already know that we saved a good bit of time here, which kind of counteracts the minute we wasted in Generation 2. Not bad. Okay, Generation 4 is tough if you have not done these quizzes a lot. Not the Generation 4 specific Pokemon. Those I feel like are fairly easy and are mostly laid out okay. Like the start of the decks of Starly, Staravia, Staraptor, Bidoof, Bibarel, Kricketot, Kricketune, Shinx, Luxio, Luxray, and then a bunch of grass and bugs. So Cherim, Cherubi, Bidoo, Roserade, Combi, Vespiquen, all of those guys are fairly easy. Weasel, Floatzel, Shellos, Gastrodon, all of them. Um, what makes Generation 4 tough is not only the evolutions to the previous three, and they're all in a crazy ass order, but then the babies are even tougher because they're not grouped together either. So trying to remember all of them without having to look back and waste a ton of time is pretty deadly. However, you can sort of group a lot of the evolutions into their own separate chunk. And the way you do that is it starts after Snover Abomasnow. And it goes for a pretty long while until it's broken up by Glaceon and Leafeon, which I guess are evolutions, but I kind of count the evolutions separately. And then it ends when it gets to Rotom. From Rotom, you can just put all of the legendaries. So Lake Trio, Creation Trio, Heatran, Manaphy, Fione, all of them. If you're writing down Snover and Abomasnow, I typically group Riolu, Lucario, Baneri, and Lopunny because they all get megas. Um, I know they don't really connect any other way, but hey, what are you going to do? We got our cat in Glameow and Ugly. And then I typically do a lot of the Team Galactic guys, so Stunky, Skuntank, Bronzor, Bronzong. And then we're on Baby Watch. So here we go. You got Chingling, Bonsley, Mime Jr., and Apini. Thankfully, those three are near each other. Munchlax is a little farther off. Mantike is very far off. So you got to remember them. Keep in mind, too, the pseudo is not at the bottom with the rest of the legendaries. So remember Garchomp as soon as you humanly can, which is very important. And then three just kind of one-offs that I have trouble remembering, so I just group them together in my head for some reason. Pachirisu, Chatot, and Spiritomb. Um, Pachirisu at least has a VGC thing. Spiritomb is part of Cynthia's team. Chatot, I don't know how the fuck anyone remembers Chatot. Maybe with the other birds? I don't know. You do you, I guess. All right, so now I'm writing down a bunch of the evolutions. The nice thing is that most of the Gen 3 ones are grouped near the end. 1 and 2 kind of intermingle a lot. But for Gen 3, you got Gallade, Probopass, Dusknoir, and Frostlass, which is fairly easy. Generation 1, you got Magnezone, Rhyperior, Magmortar, Electivire, Tangrowth, and Licky Licky. And then Gen 2, which is where a lot of them are, Togekiss, Yanmega, Gliscor, Weavile, and then they separate some of them. So keep in mind, Honchkrow, Mismagius, and Ambipom are just up in that top part of the decks. But Yanmega, who I kind of grouped together, is sort of a little bit near the bottom. Not ideal. You also got Mamoswine as well. Porygon Z is like a Gen 1, but he also had a Gen 2 guy. So there you go. And now I'm missing about 3. I believe the evolution is Licky Licky. The line, I don't actually remember. I know it doesn't take a minute. Having done this before, obviously. Okay, Licky Licky. And then who are the two? Is it not a grass type, not a bug? It's Shellos and Gastrodon, right? Usually when I do Weasel, Floatzel, I do Shellos, Gastrodon, and Finneon, Lumineon, but I didn't this time. LOL. All right, Generation 5. So 5 is nice in the sense that there are no evolutions to previous Pokemon. There's no baby forms. It is all self-contained, which means you don't have to look back. The tough part is that there are like 150 plus. So it's one of the larger decks, and remembering all of them and trying to group them in ways that make sense is pretty tricky. I've not really memorized the bottom part of this decks very well. So I have like a bunch of little steps that I have to go through of being like, okay, get the one-off legendaries, Keldeo, Meloetta, Genesect, get the dragons, Keyrim, Reshiram, and Zekrom. Get the genies, Landorus, Tornadus, Thundurus, and then the kind of Swords of Justice, right? All of those guys. Bugs, Larvesta, and Volcarona, which then leads me to Joltik, Galvantula. You can get Escavalier, Shelmet, Carablast, Acelgor, all four of those guys. Durant and Heatmore are kind of a pair, and they're also near the end. Buffalot, don't know why Buffalon's all the way at the bottom. He's just one that you're going to have to remember alongside other epic one-offs like Stunfisk and Alamamola. At least with Alamamola, you can think of Love Disc, and Tauros, you can think of Buffalon, so they have some counterparts there. Then you kind of have some Ghost and Dark types, so Litwick, Lampic, Chandelure. You got Golett and Golurk down here, Pawniard and Bisharp down here. And if you're writing down Pawniard and Bisharp, get the other Dark type in Zora and Zoroark. And then there's a section of birds. So P-Dove, Tranquil Unpheasant, Swana Ducklet, then Rufflet, Braviary, Volibee, Mandibuzz. You get all of them down at the bottom. A few ice types, Beartic, Cupchew, Cryogonal is kind of a tough one. And then if you want, at this point, you can get the inanimate object guys because you have Vanillite, Vanillix, Vanillish, all of them. Garbodor, Trubbish, Clink, Clang, and Clink Clang, because why not? And then keep in mind you have like separate dragon lines. So the real pseudo legendary, Dino, Zwellius, and Hydreigon, but then the kind of fake one, Axu, Fracture, and Haxorus, as well as Druddigon, another one off. You sort of lump the dragons all together, which is fairly easy. I typically, when I do Cryogonal, I think of another kind of one-off guy with a goofy name in Sigilif. Don't know why. And then if I do Sigilif, I remember Yamask and Cofagrigus are like next to each other. Basculin is kind of your one-off fish, and then if I'm thinking of like water types in the Generation 1 sense, that usually leads me to Frillish and Jellicent. You have your two Psychic type lines right next to each other, so Gothita, Gothorita, Gothitelle, Solosis, Duosion, and Reuniclus. And then I have the Denku group, which I can only really memorize because they're Pokemon the Denku has used in the past. So that would be Fungus, Amoongus, Ferroseed, Ferrothorn, Mienfoo, Mienshao, Behem, and Elgium, and all of them. And usually if I'm writing down Mienfoo and Mienshao, that means we got fighting types. So Throw, Sock, Scraggy, Scrafty, Conkeldurr, Girder, Timber, all of them. So now's a great time to get them, because when else are you going to have the opportunity? Mana and Masharna are just high up there for some stupid reason. Same for Woobat and Swoobat. Dwebble and Crustle is another one that I have a hard time remembering. Usually, and I'm starting to figure out, most generations have either a spider or a crab. So Generation 1, Krabby Kingler, Corphish Crota in Gen 3, right? Dwebble Crustle is the one you got to get for Generation 5. The Desert Boys. So Darumaka, Darmanitan, Maractus, Sandile, Krokorok, Crocodile, get them while you can. Your electric types. So Blitzel, Zebstrika, Emolga, Tynamo, Electric, Electros. This is also a good opportunity to throw Joltik and Galvantula if you haven't gotten them yet. Drillbur and Excadrill is kind of like Sandshrew and Sandslash. So your Geodude line would then be Boldor, Gigalith, Roggenrola, all of those boys. I know I'm getting these out of order, whatever. I type whatever comes to mind the quickest. I'm not concerned about the exact ordering of things, if that was a concern for you. The Timpole, Seismitoad, that line is kind of like Poliwag and Poliwhirl. You got all the type monkeys next to each other, so Pansage, Pampor, Pansear, Simisage, Simipour, Simisear. And then your dog and cat are right next to each other in Generation 5. So Lillipup, Stoutland, Herdier, all of them, Liepard, Purloin. And then I would recommend saving Lillipup for last, because if you spell Lillipup, it kind of sounds like Lilligant. So then that's a great way to lead into the grass types, which I have a bitch remembering. Those would be Petalil, Lilligant, Cottony, Whimsicott, Deerling, Sawsbuck, and then I kind of throw in some bugs there too. So Swaddle, Swadloon, Leavanny, Venipede, Scolipede, Whirlipede. And then for whatever reason, I usually throw Cincino and Mincino in there. Although you could do it with Audino as well, since they're all kind of normal types. Whatever works for you. And then the fossils. because every generation has fossils except for Gen 2 and 7, arguably, although I think there is kind of one there. Gen 6 is really easy because there's not very many Pokemon, and the types are usually brought together very closely. Um, However, there are a few that I do forget very often. Go-Goat, Skidoo, Pancham, Pangoro. I always start with Helioptile and Heliolisk because I've missed so many quizzes doing this. There's a dog and 2 cats in Generation 6. So you get Furfur for your dog, and then for your cat, Litleo, Pyroar, or Esper, and Meowstic. You just throw both of them in there. Of course, you got your main bug, your main rodent, your main bird. That's an every generation thing. So I'm just sort of writing all of them down. Thankfully, Talonflame is pretty goated, so fairly easy to remember. There's a Pikachu clone in every generation as well. So obviously, Pikachu in Gen 1. Pichu is easily spotted with the babies. Plusle and Minun are in that electric route. Pachirisu is a one-off in Sinnoh, which I had trouble forgetting. And then Emolga for Unova with the other electric types. In Generation 6, Dedenne is the one here, and he's kind of sectioned near what I like to call the 5 or 6 one-offs of Gen 6. So Sylveon, Halucha, Dedenne, Carbank, and if you're writing down Carbank, now's a great time to write down a not Dragalge, Diancie, and then a Klefki. This is the last one off there, so go ahead and get him while you can. You'll notice a lot of the water creatures are near each other. Inkay, Malamar, Binnacle, Barbaracle, Skrelp, Dragalge, Clawitzer, Clauncher, all in a row. The fossils are right next to each other. Tyrant, Tyrantrum, Amora, Aurorus. Easy. You got your dragon near the end, Noibat, Noivern, your ice type near the end, Bergmite, and Avalugg, your pseudo legendary near the end, like it should be. Not the very end, but still. And Sliggoo, Gumi, Gudra. And then there's only a few like actual 3 Pokemon lines. You got Flabebe, Floette, Florges, Honedge, Doublade, Aegislash, the Talonflame line, and the pseudo-legendary line. You'll notice the 2 ghosts are next to each other. Phantump, Trevenant, Pumpkaboo, Gourgeist, all kind of in a row. There's like 4 fairies that are pink, all next to each other. Spritzee, Aromatisse, Swirlix, Slurpuff. And then you can just sort of like write the main starters, and then you're good to go. So yeah, I feel like Generation 6 is fairly easy. You're remembering Go-Goat, Skidoo, Helioptile, Heliolisk, Pancham, Pangoro, and the one-offs. Once you got them, I think anybody can memorize Generation 6. All right, with about 7 minutes left, we've arrived at our last full generation, so still making fairly great time. However, I'm not good at Generation 7 because it is the newest that I've added into the rotation, and I have lost so many quizzes purely based on the one-offs because, dear God, there are so many of them. Pukumuku, Oricorio, Bruxish, Minior, Komala, Turtonator, Mimikyu, Togedemaru, Comfey, and like 8 more that I'm forgetting. Wishy-washy, right? Like it just never ends. And while some of them are grouped together, Drampa, Delmise, while some of them are grouped together, a lot of them are just thrown off in separate parts of the Pokedex, making them like damn near impossible to remember. We do have our 2 monkeys, Passimian and Oranguru. Your dog in this generation is Lycanroc and Rockruff, who I'm not going to get for a while, but the starter is sort of the cat. We've already gotten a few because we did Generation 1 earlier, so it already lists out those forms for us, which is pretty nice. Your spider, Dewpider, Araquanid, and then you also get a crab in Kerbrawler and Crabominable. After you get them, Beware and Stuffle are pretty easy to write down. If you get Wishy-Washy, Toxapex, and Marini, kind of your water types. Salandit, Salazzle, and Marowak are all kind of near that trial, which makes a lot of sense. Shiinotic and Morlul are near the grass types, and Fomantis, Lurantis, Steenie, Bounsweet, Sarina. Mudbray and Mudsdale I just remember because I think it's just like a goated Pokemon. So no real way around that. Cutiefly and Rabombi I try to get with Comfey if possible. Your pseudo is near the end, but there's a lot of extra spaces there. That's because on top of legendaries, you also have Ultra Beasts. So that's going to take up a big portion. Thankfully, I remember them all fairly well. So I'm kind of saving them a little bit. Your starting bird, Picky Peck, Drumbeat Toucanon, your rat, Gumshoe, Young Goose, and then Rattata, Eradicate, right? You can get both of them. And then your bug, Vikavolt, Charjabug, Grubbin, all of them. Now I'm writing down our grass guys, which is fairly easy. It's so much easier actually doing it this way with Lola rather than having to remember those Generation 1 forms because I get screwed on them of like how many there are, which is a pain in the ass. All right, now we're on to legendary stuff. So Cosmog, Cosmoem, Solgaleo, Lunala, easy. Then you get Necrozma. Then I would get the three kind of separate like one-offs in Magearna, Zeraora, and Marshadow. Then I get kind of the Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon Ultra Beast. So Blacephalon, Stakataka, Poipole, Naganadel. You can get the Tapus in their own group. Tapu Lele, Finny, Koko, Bulu. And then it's just sort of the main set of Ultra Beast. Nihilego is kind of obviously a big one story-wise. And then I think of Luzamine, which leads me to Pheromosa. The funny ones, Buzzwole and Guzzlord. And then the kind of steel guys, Kartana and Celesteela. Xurkitree is the one I always do first because he's the one I tend to forget the most, which is odd because he's a striking design. But I just don't remember him very well. So there you go. All right, so we have two lines left. One of them is Sandygast and Palisand, who I should have wrote down when I got Mimikyu. Otherwise, he's your main ghost line. And then, like I mentioned earlier, Rockruff and Lycanroc, which is your dogs. So from here, we're going to go down to Unknown, which is like Melmetal and Meltan. They kind of count it in Generation 7, unlike Cerebi and a bunch of other Pokedex websites. But that takes no time at all. From there, we go to Hisui, and a lot of them are filled out just based on prior forms. But a couple that you have to remember for yourself: Weirdeer, Overquill, Basculegion, Enamorus, Cleavor, Ursaluna, and Sneasler. Some of them you can pick up just because you have a Sneasel right next to Sneasler, Basculin right next to Basculegion, Enamorus right next to Legendaries, Overquill next to my main Quillfish. But some of them are a bit more one-offs. All right, and then Paldea Expedition. So essentially the DLC. You got Ursaluna from earlier. I would get your legendaries like Terapagos, Petront, Ogerpon, and then the trio of those like Poison Chain guys. Okidoki, Munkidori, Pheasantipity. Dipplin and Hydrapple are connected. Archlodon's kind of a one-off. Sinistcha and Poltergeist, don't know why they include them here. And then the two kind of swords trio, as well as the beast trio: Walking Wake, Gouging Fire, Raging Bolt, Iron Leaves, Iron Boulder, Iron Crown. And then that's it. Fairly easy, all things considered. Pheasantipity is a little tough to spell, so that's usually why I save them. And with that, we have reached 8:33 with a whole 2 minutes and 20 seconds to go, which means I just have extra time here. But because I don't know Galar and Paldea, I'm not going to be going very fast. Just whoever comes to my mind, straight up. So there you go. I have made a graph of how many Pokemon I got per 60 seconds. The best I did was minute 15. I got 37 of them. Went from 373 to 410, which is pretty goated. The worst I do is minute 10, where I got 0 because I spent that entire minute trying to think of Kingdra. Like I said, we needed to get 833. If you divide that by 35, you need about 23.8 Pokemon a minute. We'll just round that up to 24. My average was I got 24.57. So a little bit above the average. Not perfect, but enough to get some extra guys as well. So yeah, if you're trying to do this very specific quiz, 24 Pokemon a minute is what you want to shoot for. Difficult, yes, but if you spend a little bit of time each day memorizing one generation at a time and then doing a full quiz once you get multiple generations, even if you don't get the entire thing, you just want to, piece by piece, kind of get it together. And I'd say the biggest piece of advice I have is just find ways to group Pokemon together. That's the real meat and potatoes, is making those connections in your mind of like remembering different Pokemon, no matter how weird it sounds in your head, no matter if you can't explain it. Like Zach's been doing this with me, and the way he pulls different Pokemon, I think is just crazy. But he was actually able to get all like 1,036 minutes. So I'm not that cracked yet, but shout out to him. Man's been working at it for a good while. It's a super fun thing to do. Just do like a quiz run a day, and you'll be surprised how far you get in only a month or two. But that's it, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching this video. And next time you see PokemonQuiz.com, it'll be every single Pokemon memorized by yours truly. 860 is our final total. So not bad. All right, guys. I've been Aiden, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.